I needed a job. Not the kind you dream about as a kid, but the kind that lets you buy groceries and pay rent without choosing between the two. After my last gig folded, graphic design at some startup that ran out of money before it ran out of cold brew, I spent 2 straight weeks scrolling through Craigslist and Indeed with a level of desperation I could practically taste. The club job came out of nowhere. I was halfway through a microwave burrito when I got a text from an unknown number. "You're Nate, right? Margot said you need work." "You got bartending experience?" I blinked. I knew a Margot. She was a friend of a friend I'd met at a rooftop party once. Apparently she still had me in her contacts. I texted back, honest, a little, mostly just house parties and some catering stuff. The reply came fast. "Good enough. Come by 7 p.m. Club Nova, ask for Luca." So I did. Club Nova was one of those places that looked like a dive from the outside. Blacked out windows, unmarked steel door. But inside, it was all pulsing LED walls and sleek chrome surfaces. The music hit like a wave the second I walked in, and I almost turned around on instinct. But then I spotted the bar, and behind it was a guy the first can only describe as trouble in tight black jeans. Luca. He didn't look up right away. He was mid-pour, eyes focused, 2 bottles moving between his hands like he'd done it 1,000 times. Which he probably had. His shirt clung to his shoulders in a way that didn't feel accidental, and the sleeves were rolled to his elbows, exposing lean, tattooed forearms. I hovered awkwardly by the end of the bar until he glanced over and smirked like he'd known I was there the whole time. "You Nate?" "Yeah." Luca?" "In the flesh." He set the bottles down and leaned in on his elbows. "You look nervous." I gave a small, awkward laugh. "Is it that obvious?" He grinned. "A little. It's cute, though." That threw me off enough to forget how to respond. He straightened up, already walking around the bar to come let me in. "Come on, you're with me tonight." I followed him through the swinging half door and immediately felt like I'd stepped onto a stage one hadn't rehearsed for. The bar was packed, bodies pressing in from every side, music thumping in time with the strobe lights. Luca moved like he belonged there. I moved like someone trying not to knock over a rack of clean glasses. "You ever pour a Jack and Coke?" he asked over the music. "Yeah, of course." "Good. Do it." He handed me a glass and gestured toward the rail. I poured, tried to keep my hands steady, and handed it off to the nearest waiting customer. Luca raised an eyebrow. "Not bad. But next time, don't baby the pour. People want to feel like they're getting their money's worth. It's half bartending, half performance." I nodded, eager, ready to take notes, until he stepped in behind me, pressed a little closer than strictly necessary, and reached for the same bottle. "Here," he murmured near my ear. "Watch the wrist." He guided my hand with his, and for a second, I forgot we were in a club full of sweaty strangers. All I could focus on was the warmth of his breath and the slide of his fingers against mine. He stepped back just as quick, smirking like he hadn't just short-circuited my entire nervous system. "You'll get the hang of it." The night went on like that, me sweating and scrambling to keep up. Luca, somehow doing everything effortlessly while throwing in casual comments that could have been harmless or could have been, "You've got nice hands. Bet you're good at more than just pouring drinks." Flirting. By the end of the shift, my shirt was clinging to my back and my feet ached, but I had made it. Barely. Luca handed me a beer from the bar fridge and leaned against the counter next to me as we cleaned up. The place was quieter now, just the hum of the lights and the occasional clink of glass. "You did good," he said, taking a sip of his drink. "Better than I expected." "Thanks." I took a long swig, trying to ignore how close he was. I was kind of thrown into the deep end. "That's how we do it here." He glanced at me, his eyes a little too steady. "Besides, I figured you'd swim. You've got that vibe." "What vibe?" He shrugged. "Like you've got more in you than you let on." I wasn't sure what to say to that. He held my gaze a beat longer, then smiled and pushed off the counter. "Anyway, same time tomorrow. Don't be late." And just like that, he was gone, vanishing through the staff door like none of that had been anything special. But I stood there for another minute, beer forgotten in my hand, trying to figure out if I'd just imagined the whole thing. I hadn't. That was just Luca. And something told me he wasn't done messing with me yet. The next night, I arrived at Club Nova with a mix of dread and excitement. I was still figuring out how much of Luca's teasing was actually flirting, and how much was just him being Luca. My first task was simple: set up the bar. Easy enough, except that every time I thought I was catching up, he swooped in with a comment, a tip, or a smirk that made my stomach do backflips. "You're a little stiff," he said as I lined up bottles. "Loosen up. Bartending is as much about attitude as it is about technique." "Right," I muttered, trying to sound confident. He came up behind me, brushing against my shoulder under the pretense of straightening a bottle. His voice dropped lower, almost teasing. "Or maybe it's you that needs loosening up." I froze. Was that? Did he just? Before I could respond, he spun around with a towel over his shoulder and laughed, as if he hadn't just said the most loaded thing of the night. "Focus, rookie. The night's starting, and we're not getting fired tonight." But it wasn't just the flirting, it was the way he watched me. Every move I made behind the bar, he was there, shadowing, hovering. Not intrusive, but undeniably aware. I caught myself catching his gaze more than once, and each time, my heart skipped. During the first rush, he moved fluidly between the bar and the floor, showing me how to call orders efficiently, how to keep a rhythm with the crowd. And yet, there were those moments, those little touches, a hand lightly brushing my arm as he passed by, a lean that brought his chest just a little too close to mine. Each time, I had to remind myself, he's your trainer. He's just showing you how to do your job. Later, when the crowd thinned, he leaned on the counter next to me. The club smelled of spilled cocktails and sweat, lights low, music vibrating through the floor. He tilted his head and studied me. "You're easy to distract," he said with a smirk. "That's dangerous in a bar." Sorry," I muttered. "No, I like it. Makes it fun." His grin lingered, playful, almost predatory in a way that made my pulse race. He pushed a stray strand of my hair behind my ear and leaned just a little closer. "I'll teach you more than just drinks if you stick with me." I choked on my words. What do you mean?" He let the question hang, then laughed softly, brushing past me to check the other side of the bar. My mind was still spinning. He didn't need to explain. The way he looked at me, the casual intimacy of his touches, it was saying more than words ever could. By the end of the night, I was soaked in sweat, shaking slightly. Not from the work, but from the constant awareness that Luca was playing a game I didn't fully understand. As I stacked the last of the glasses, he came up behind me again, resting a hand lightly on my shoulder. "You're improving," he murmured. "Maybe by the end of the week, you'll be able to pour without me needing to touch you at all." I swallowed hard. Thanks." He leaned down slightly, close enough that I could feel the heat of his body. "Or maybe," he said, voice low, teasing, "I just like being close." Then he was gone again, leaving me alone with the sticky bar and my rapidly beating heart. Walking home that night, I kept replaying everything. Each laugh, each brush of his hand, each glance. I knew I was in over my head. But the thought of seeing him tomorrow, the thought of another night under his intense gaze, made me realize I didn't care. Something told me that Luca wasn't just interested in my bartending. By the third night, I was starting to get the hang of the bar, but I wasn't getting the hang of Luca. Every shift felt like a test, only instead of measuring my pouring skills, he seemed intent on testing how flustered he could make me. I arrived early, trying to look calm, professional. The club was quiet, just the dim hum of refrigerators and the occasional clink of glasses. Luca was already there, leaning casually against the bar, a towel slung over his shoulder, eyes scanning the bottles like a general inspecting his troops. "Look alive, rookie," he said, smirking. "Big night tonight, you ready?" I nodded, gripping a rag a little too tightly. "Good. But first," he leaned in, his face inches from mine. My pulse spiked. "How's my favorite trainee feeling?" I choked on a laugh. Good. Ready? He grinned and straightened, brushing past me so close I could feel the heat radiating off him. The first wave of customers hit, and suddenly I was juggling multiple orders, shaking cocktails, sliding drinks down the rail. Luca moved beside me like a shadow, occasionally whispering tips or corrections, except they weren't just professional. "Tilt your wrist more," he said, leaning over so our shoulders brushed. The contact was electric. "Or, I could just do it for you." I froze. Did he just offer to pour the drink with me? He smirked at my reaction, obviously pleased. "Relax." I'm just kidding, mostly. The night stretched on in a blur of lights, music, and bodies pressed close. Luca kept drifting near me, always with that teasing grin, always with a casual touch that lingered just long enough to make my chest tighten. At one point, he passed me a shaker and paused, letting his fingers brush mine as he handed it over. I nearly dropped it. "You're distracting me," I whispered, half laughing, half serious. He raised an eyebrow. "Am I? Or are you just noticing for the first time?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind was a mess of adrenaline, sweat, and something else I couldn't name. Later, the crowd thinned. I was wiping down the bar when he leaned on the counter next to me. Up close, I could see every detail of his face. The slight stubble, the curve of his jaw, the way his lips curved when he smirked. "You did good tonight," he said softly, not the teasing tone from earlier, but something lower, heavier. "Thanks," I murmured. He studied me for a moment, then leaned in, just enough that I could feel his presence. "You know," he said, voice low, "I could get used to having you around." I swallowed hard. My words trailed off. He grinned, giving my shoulder a light, deliberate bump. "Don't worry, rookie. You'll figure it out." And then he left, disappearing into the staff room. I stood there for a long minute, heart hammering. It wasn't just the flirting anymore. It wasn't just the touches. It was the way he looked at me, the way he made the world shrink down to the two of us behind the bar. Walking home that night, I kept replaying everything. Every brush of his fingers, every lingering glance, every smirk that felt like a private joke I wasn't sure I was supposed to be part of. I knew one thing for certain. Luca wasn't just interested in my bartending skills. He was interested in me. And I wasn't sure I was ready for what that meant. By the fourth night, I was starting to get confident behind the bar, but Luca was impossible to read. He had this way of appearing wherever I was, leaning close with that sly grin, making casual touches feel electric. I was sweaty, tired, and every nerve in my body was hyper-aware of him. The night started normally enough. He handed me a shaker and watched over my shoulder as I poured a whiskey sour. "Not bad," he said, letting his fingers brush mine as he corrected my grip. "But let's see if you can make it without me hovering." I tried to focus, I really did. But every time I glanced up, his eyes were on me, the smirk always there, always knowing. Later, during a lull, he leaned against the bar beside me. The club's lights dimmed slightly, casting shadows over his face. He tilted his head, watching me as I wiped down a counter. "You're tense," he said softly. "Relax. It's just me. No one's watching." I swallowed hard. "I'm fine." "Sure you are." He smirked, brushing a stray lock of hair from my forehead. My chest skipped a beat. "You know, you're fun to tease." I wanted to laugh, I wanted to protest, but all I could do was stare. He leaned closer, and I could feel his warmth. The air between us was charged, thick. My hand shook slightly as I stacked some glasses. "Ever been kissed at work?" he asked casually, almost like he was talking about the weather. I choked on a laugh. "What?" "You heard me." He smirked, his lips just inches from mine. "It's a special kind of thrill working here, if you know who to watch." I couldn't look away. His voice was low, teasing, dangerous. Every instinct screamed at me to step back, but every other part of me wanted to lean in. The next hour was a blur. Drinks, customers, tips, and Luca, always close, always whispering little jokes and compliments that made my skin prickle. At one point, he placed his hand on my lower back, accidentally, but I didn't move away fast enough. He caught my reaction with a knowing look and smirked. "Relax, rookie," he said softly. "I like watching you figure me out." By the end of the shift, my brain was fried, my body buzzing from adrenaline, and my heart. I didn't even want to think about it. Luca clapped me on the shoulder as we cleaned up together. "You survived another night," he said. "I think you're starting to enjoy this." I opened my mouth to reply, but he leaned in close, his breath warm against my ear. "You should know," he whispered. "I'm not just here to train you on drinks." Then he pulled back, just enough to give me that smirk that made my stomach knot, and walked toward the staff door. I was left standing there, shaking, my mind spinning. He wasn't kidding. He hadn't been joking. And I wasn't sure I wanted him to stop. The fifth night felt different before I even stepped into Club Nova. I could feel it in my chest, a mix of anticipation and dread that had nothing to do with the work. Luca texted me earlier that day. "Don't be late. I've got plans for your training tonight." I didn't know what that meant, and part of me didn't want to, but curiosity, or maybe something else, won out. When I arrived, Luca was already there, leaning casually against the bar. He was dressed the same as always, tight black shirt, jeans that hugged him just right, but there was something in the way he looked at me that made my knees weak. "Finally," he said, smirking as I approached. "I was starting to think you'd chicken out." "I'm not," I stopped myself. "Late?" He chuckled, brushing past me so close that our shoulders collided. The heat of his body against mine sent a shiver down my spine. "Not yet, but let's not keep the night waiting." The club was packed. The music thumped in my chest, lights flickering over sweat and skin. Luca moved behind the bar like he owned the place, effortlessly mixing drinks, cracking jokes, and keeping an eye on me at the same time. Then came the first deliberate touch. I was sliding a drink down the rail when he leaned over from behind, his hand brushing mine. Not by accident. I froze, the glass wobbling. "You're shaking," he murmured. "Excited?" I stammered, trying to focus on the drink in front of me instead of the heat radiating off his body. "Relax," he said, his hand lingering on my wrist. "I've got you." That hand, so light yet impossibly intimate, stayed longer than necessary, and I felt my control slipping. The teasing smirk, the way his eyes held mine, it was intoxicating. Later, during a slower moment, he leaned on the bar next to me. He tilted his head, letting his shoulder brush mine. "You know," he said softly, almost conspiratorially, "I like seeing you flustered. Makes the night more fun." I swallowed hard. "You're really good at this." "Good at bartending?" he asked, voice teasing. "Or good at distracting you?" I could feel my cheeks heating. "Both," I admitted quietly. He smirked, leaning just a fraction closer, enough that I caught a whiff of his cologne. That's what I thought. The night ended with him guiding me through closing duties, his touches lingering a little longer than professional. Every brush of his hand, every playful nudge, felt like a test I couldn't stop myself from failing. As I walked home afterward, I replayed every moment. Every glance, every smirk, every brush of his hand. He wasn't just training me in bartending. He was training me in him, and somehow I didn't mind. A week into training, it was clear I wasn't just learning to bartend. I was learning how to survive Luca's teasing. Every night behind the bar felt like a test of focus and restraint, and I was failing spectacularly. That Thursday, after a particularly hectic rush, Luca motioned me aside. The club was winding down, the bass softened, the last few stragglers heading out. He leaned against the bar, casual, but there was a glint in his eye that made my stomach knot. "You've improved," he said, voice low. "Not bad for a rookie." "Thanks," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant, but my hands were still trembling slightly from adrenaline, and from him standing so close. He smirked, brushing a hand across my arm under the pretense of straightening my apron. "You know," he said, his voice dropping just a little lower. I could teach you more than just drinks. I froze. My brain scrambled. My heart hammered. More than drinks? I asked, barely above a whisper. He leaned in, so close I could feel his breath. Yeah, he murmured. I could teach you how to handle attention, how to handle me. The tension was electric. The club felt smaller, the air thick and suffocating. I wanted to back away, but my body wouldn't obey. Luca's smirk was teasing, almost predatory, and yet there was warmth there too. A promise that this was consensual if I dared to lean in. Are you trying to distract me? I whispered, my voice barely audible over the fading music. Maybe, he said softly, brushing a hand along my wrist. But only if you let me. I swallowed hard. My pulse was racing, every nerve screaming. But part of me didn't want him to stop. His hand lingered longer than necessary, and I could feel a jolt of heat where our skin met. He straightened suddenly, smirking again. All right, rookie, that's enough for tonight. Don't think you're getting away without closing duty, though. Even as he walked away, the memory of his hand on me, the way his gaze lingered, left me trembling behind the bar. I realized I was thinking about him in ways I hadn't anticipated, ways that had nothing to do with bartending. Walking home, I replayed every interaction from the night. Every smirk, every touch, every teasing comment. I'd always known flirting could be dangerous. I hadn't realized it could feel like electricity under my skin, like every nerve ending was alert, like my mind could only think of one thing: Luca. And I was starting to hope he felt the same way. It happened on Saturday night, the busiest night of the week. Club Nova was packed, lights flashing, bodies moving to the heavy beat. I was pouring, mixing, trying to keep up. But all I could think about was Luca. Every time he brushed past me, every glance that lingered just a second too long made my chest tighten. After the rush, he motioned me aside again. We ducked behind the bar, away from the lingering customers and leftover mess. The hum of the club softened, leaving only the faint echo of bass. You've done well tonight, he said, voice low and casual, but his eyes were anything but. I think it's time you learned a different kind of skill, I blinked. Different skill? He leaned closer, brushing against me under the guise of adjusting a bottle. His hand lingered on mine for a heartbeat too long. Yeah, the kind that doesn't involve drinks. The kind that involves paying attention to me. My heart jumped. I could feel my face heating, my thoughts scattered. Relax, he said softly, his breath warm against my ear. You've been doing great behind the bar. Now it's time for a more personal lesson. He reached out, sliding his hand lightly over my forearm. I shivered, unable to pull away. His touch wasn't rough, but deliberate, intimate. You're tense, he murmured, fingers brushing along my wrist. Let me show you how to relax. Before I could answer, he leaned even closer, his lips brushing my cheek lightly. The shock made me freeze, every nerve in my body screaming, but part of me didn't want to move. His hand rested lightly on my back, warm and grounding. I've been watching you, he whispered, voice low. Not just your bartending. You, every reaction, every glance. I noticed it all. My breath caught. I notice you too, I admitted, voice barely above a whisper. He smirked, a slow, knowing smile. Good. Because I don't just flirt for fun, rookie. Then he stepped back slightly, giving me just enough space to breathe, but not enough to escape the tension. His gaze held mine, intense and teasing, promising that this wasn't over. You're learning fast, he said softly, almost reverently, and I'm enjoying the process more than I probably should. I swallowed hard, the heat of the club and his presence pressing down on me. I knew in that moment that Luca wasn't just my trainer. He was the reason my hands shook, my chest raced, and my thoughts were scattered in ways I'd never experienced before. And deep down, I didn't want him to stop. The night ended with us standing close behind the bar, the club slowly emptying, our breaths shallow, our hands occasionally brushing. Every touch, every word, every smirk left me dizzy, aware that whatever this was between us, it was far from over. The following week, I arrived at Club Nova, already on edge. Every step behind the bar felt heavier, my nerves frayed, my pulse constantly picking up whenever Luca appeared. I knew I was hooked, not just on the thrill of bartending, but on him. After another chaotic rush, Luca motioned me aside once more. This time, he didn't wait for a quieter moment. He grabbed a rag and started wiping the bar beside me, close enough that our arms brushed repeatedly. The air between us was charged, thick with tension neither of us bothered to deny. "You've been doing well," he said, voice soft, almost intimate, like he was letting me in on a secret. "But there's something you need to understand about this, about me." I swallowed hard, heart hammering. "What's that?" He leaned in, close enough that I could feel his breath on my neck. "I don't just flirt for fun," he murmured. "Not with you. I've been testing you, seeing how far I could push, how much you notice, how much you want it." I froze, heat flooding my chest. "And," I whispered. He smirked, brushing his fingers lightly along my forearm, tracing lines that sent shivers down my spine. "And it worked," he said, low and teasing. "You noticed. You wanted it. Don't lie." I didn't. I couldn't. The truth had been burning inside me for days. Every glance, every brush of his hand, a spark I couldn't ignore. I can't stop thinking about you," I admitted, voice trembling. His grin widened, and for the first time, it wasn't just teasing. It was soft, warm, a private smile meant for me alone. "Good," he said, leaning closer, "because I feel the same way." Then he did something that made my chest explode. He pressed his lips to my cheek, slow, deliberate, a teasing whisper of contact that left my entire body trembling. "See? You can relax now. You're safe with me." I turned toward him, heart in my throat, finally letting myself close the distance. Our lips met, tentative at first, then firmer, electric. Every tension, every flirt, every teasing touch over the past week culminated in that moment, and it was overwhelming, terrifying, and thrilling at the same time. When we finally pulled back, both of us breathing a little too hard, Luca smirked, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "You've been a good student," he said softly. "Now, let me show you the rest of the lesson." I laughed breathlessly, shaking my head. "I think I can handle it." And in that moment, behind the bar at Club Nova, with the city lights glimmering outside and the club quieting down, I realized this wasn't just training. This was something entirely new, something I wanted to see through, night after night, with Luca by my side. He wasn't just my bartender trainer, he was my obsession. And somehow, I knew I was his.